Straight talk from Israel. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome to Soul Talk. This is Leora Mandel. I'll be joined with Rabbi David Aaron after the break. Why is it that it's just so hard to like certain people, to see the positive in their good traits? Every person has them, but some people it's just harder to. And why is it that sometimes in life, yes, we may have blessings, there are many good things, there's a lot I should be grateful for, and yet I am focused on the negative, the things that are upsetting me. There's always some of that too. Sometimes there's more of that. Sometimes there could be more positive and good, but I just keep focusing on and seeing the negative. Why do we do this? Because I think we'd all agree we'd be much happier if we would see the positive and the good in others. We'd be much happier if we were focusing on the blessings of our life. We'd be getting along much better if we could focus on what we have in common with other people instead of where we're different. A lot less tension, a lot less negativity. We'd just be getting along better. And ultimately, that is our goal. And especially during this time period, these 3 weeks where we are in mourning, national mourning for the loss of the temple, the Beit HaMikdash, but also mourning the fact that we are still fractured as a nation, as a people. That part of what got us here in the first place is sinat chinam, baseless hatred. And I think a source of that is obviously focusing on where we differ, where we're not the same, where we see negativity in others and problems and challenges, and it's all about them. And if only they would act differently and be different, things would be so much better. Instead of realizing, yes, we are different, we see things very differently, we may never quite see them the same, but why can't we still find common ground? Why can't we focus on certain good traits that even people who we disagree with have? So that's what I would like to address with the rabbi after the break, because this is something that we really actively need to be working on right now. If we want to fix the cause of why we are still here in exile and the world is still in such a fractured state, it's much easier to look out at other people and say, well, if only they'd fix themselves up, things would be so much better. But it really starts with me. It starts with myself. You know, we can't change other people, that I think we all understand, but every single one of us that says, you know what, let me look inside and see how I can change myself. Maybe I'm also a bit negative. I also have certain ways of looking at other people that if I would just be able to change that in myself, I'd be able to get along with others that I maybe disagree with a little bit better. Maybe there's some work inside of myself that will enable me to reflect differently on those around me and the situations around me. The question is, how do we go about doing that? And that is what I'd like to address with the rabbi after the break. Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
Israel is located in one of the most volatile areas in the world. Israel is an island of stability in a sea of war and unrest. In the midst of this turmoil, Israel stands out as a beacon of order and human progress. Each week we update you on what's happening in this, the Jewish state, a true light unto the nations. This is Jay Shapiro. Join me every Thursday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Welcome to Soul Talk. This is Leora Mandel with Rabbi David Aaron. We are in the time period of the 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, where we remember the destruction of the Beit HaMikdash, the temple, and it's a time of national mourning because this isn't just something that happened so long ago. This is something we're still experiencing today because we are still in exile. And one of the reasons we are still here, unfortunately, in exile, even if you're living in Israel, we still don't have the temple rebuilt. We're still not in the actual time of redemption, is because the cause hasn't been fixed. One of the causes, which is baseless hatred. And this is a time period where we really do try to work on fixing that, trying to work even on the opposite of just giving and loving and being, caring for other people. And I've really been giving it thought, at least for myself. What is the root of baseless hatred? What's also the root of the opposite of trying to fix that, of just being avat chinam, just, caring for other people, seeing the good in others. And I think it really comes down to having a good eye, an eye that sees the positive, the good, that doesn't put as much focus and emphasis on the problems, the bad, the negative in other people. Everyone has it. Okay, but here's where my question for you, Rabbi, comes in. It's great. It sounds great in theory. I think we'd all agree, yes, it's great to develop a good eye, to see the positive, see the good in others. But it's so hard to do, especially with people that are, that aggravate us, or it's much easier to see the negative or what frustrates us. So my question is, how can we develop this, this good eye that will be able to focus more on the positive and the good in other people, and downplay the parts that, maybe are there but aren't the part that are going to enable us to really care for someone else?
Great. Yes, our sages teach us that if we're in a generation whereby the temple has not been rebuilt, then in some way we continue to practice the very mistake that brought it down in the first place. So yeah, and as you mentioned, baseless hate is the key to why the second temple was destroyed. And how do we practically address that without it just being, nice words that might sound like something out of the 60s, love, 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 all you need is love. I think we need to start with the kind of fake it till you make it attitude. I actually call it fake it till you awake it, because I believe deep inside ourselves we are loving, caring people. But sometimes, or maybe over a long period of time, we've successfully covered that up like a tarnished coin that needs polishing, but underneath it is pure silver. And so I don't want to call it fake it till you make it, but fake it till you awake it. But what is the faking it? The faking it is start with what you talk about. It's very hard to control what we think, because thoughts just come up into my mind. You walk down the street, you see somebody, and you can't help it. You just have a negative thought of, oh, look at the shirt they're wearing. It doesn't match their pants, or who knows what. But, we can be extremely critical, and it's very quick, and we have these negative thoughts. At the very least, don't make those negative thoughts more real by talking about it. And one of the practices of Judaism is to try and refrain from talking about anything negative. Like, why talk about things that are negative? Even walking down the street, and let's say shouldn't see, God forbid you saw a dead cat, and you're with a friend, and your friend doesn't see the dead cat. Why say, oh, look at that dead cat? Why even use precious words to talk about something negative or sad? And so we start with positive talk. And because, as I mentioned, thoughts are very hard to control, and they just drop into our heads. But at the very least, we shouldn't fuel those thoughts by now giving them even greater reality by putting them into words and putting them out into the world and sharing them with other people. So that's the beginning, and what I think is really beautiful in Israel, and I assume it probably happens in other parts of the world, during this period of time, there's a very conscious effort to study the laws of Lashon Hara, to study the laws of what's inappropriate to be saying about people. And to me, the laws of Lashon Hara is one of the great demonstrations of what's so extraordinary about Torah tradition. I don't think any tradition has anything anywhere close to this, of such an elaborate network of guidance of what is not appropriate to say about somebody else. And so much of our society it revolves around gossip and talking about other people, specifically about negative things about them, even when there is absolutely no benefit to the listener hearing and knowing any of this material. And even, by the way, Lashon Hara is not just simply, making up something negative. Even if it's true, you don't talk about somebody else's negative traits, even if they're true, unless you're protecting somebody from them, and they really definitely need to know that.
So much of this really starts with having an awareness, because even, the talk of talking about something negative or talking about Lashon Hara this is a really important point. If we're not even consciously aware of the fact that we're doing this all the time and how it affects us, we just keep going with it. It actually, a number of years ago, a woman had told me that she wasn't brought up with any consciousness of the concept of Lashon Hara. In fact, she wasn't aware of a lot of mitzvot, and as she was learning more, she really became very connected to the learning and wanting to know more about Lashon Hara. And she said all of a sudden one day she realized, this is all I talk about at work. All day, this is what we sit. Me and my coworkers, we're always talking about other people, and we're always talking about what's going on in everyone else's lives, and they're not even necessarily there, and that's just the conversation that's just everywhere. And I never thought about it before as being a problem. It was just the way we spoke. And starting to learn about the laws of Lashon Hara made her all of a sudden very conscientious, and she really, connected to the idea in theory, and then it hit her then in practice. Look, she never thought about it. So all of a sudden when she became aware of it, it was a lot of work to try to reshift things. But everything you're talking about here too is the way we talk. If we're talking about negative things, focusing on negative things, focusing on other people in our speech, the first step is really being aware that we're doing it.
All right. And it's very daunting when you realize how much we're doing it. Once a person starts learning these laws of the great rabbi referred to as the Chafetz Chaim, it can become very daunting. A lot of people don't even want to learn these details because they start to realize, my gosh, if I really keep this, I'll have nothing to say. And it would really be better you say nothing than to say negative things about people. Not only because it's negative about people, it really undermines you. Speaking Lashon Hara is a way of reinforcing a feeling of insecurity about ourselves. If I feel good about myself by demonstrating or indicating what's bad about other people, well, that's really bad about ourselves. That's your source. That instead of lifting yourself, putting others down, it doesn't work. In a real way, it really is the opposite. And a lot of people don't realize that Lashon Hara is not just simply to protect other people. It's to protect you from wasting your time in finding ways to feel good about yourself by spending so much time seeking the bad in others.
So in a sense, the real root of uprooting this is getting more in touch with myself, the awareness piece, but also if I would work on getting in touch with my own value, really having a sense of my true value, and if there are things about myself that maybe I need to work on so that I can feel respect for myself, then I'd have much less of a need to be talking about other people, putting other people down. So meaning I can work on the awareness piece, but really it comes down to even further, going further down in this is really working on myself so that I'm not needing to be speaking about other people to feel like I have some sense of value. I can feel good about myself without needing to do that.
And I also encourage people to realize that if you're in a circle of friends that are speaking negatively about other people, then it's very likely they're speaking negatively about you too. Like, why do we think that somehow we're absolved and we will not become the victim of this same kind of conversation? And so people don't realize it. I remember one of the supporters of my organization, he told me that if you're interviewing somebody and they start saying negative things about their previous company they worked at, don't hire them. Because if that's what they say in an interview, then be sure that they'll be saying that about you if you hire them. Because it's so inappropriate. Why should, at an interview, say bad things about your previous employer? And so I think a person should realize that when you hang with people where gossip is where it's at, and they really have nothing of real quality have conversations about other than, what's wrong with somebody else, then be sure that you are going to be a candidate for that same kind of conversation against you.
There's that, it reminds you of that saying, what goes around comes around. So if you want a lot of good to go around, then you should be sending out good, focusing on good, talking, seeing good in other people, and that is what will come back. It's a very good point. If we're going to be focusing on the negative in others and speaking about it to others, it will also come back to us ultimately.
And, beyond just speaking well, we should make a conscious effort to do random acts of kindness.
Mm.
I think often people don't realize that they are not really doing anything particularly kind for anybody today or yesterday. And so we're not reinforcing that connection. And maybe we can explore that in the next session.
Yes, when we return, Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Tamar? She's sassy.
She's smart.
She's funny.
But she's also a real Jewish mother.
Hi, everybody. I'm Tamar Yona. And yes, I can be all of those things. But at Israel News Talk Radio, I'm here to bring you the news stories and guests that you may not hear anywhere else. Join me live on air Sundays, Mondays, and Tuesdays for the most unique and bold talk radio in Israel.
The Tamar Yona Show.
Shalom, I'm Leah Aharoni. Join me on my show, News from the Torah. Each Sunday, we'll use the weekly Torah portion as a prism for understanding the news today. Listen to News from the Torah to gain clarity about the times we're living in and to understand your own spiritual path in the process. News from the Torah every Sunday on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome back to Soul Talk. Leora Mandel with Rabbi David Aaron, talking about how to develop a good eye, seeing the good in others, building a sense of love and connection, which is what we're trying to do during this time period. Ahavat Chinam, seeing the positive and the good in others. And the first place you're saying we need to start is with the way we speak, trying to work on making sure positive speech about life, everything around us, but specifically about other people. And then you mentioned again that action, the way we act with other people, is so significant and important. And it's interesting, we're talking about speech, you're saying we have more control over, especially more than feelings, and action, I would say, even more so.
Right. I remember one of my teachers pointed out, when you ask people today, are you a good person? It's not uncommon that they respond, yeah, I've never hurt anybody. And when you really think about what they just said, they didn't say they're not a good person. They said they're just not a not good person. To say that I don't hurt anybody doesn't make you a good person. It makes you not a bad person. But to be a good person is somebody who does good, not a person that refrains from doing bad. To do good, of course, you refrain from doing bad, but the point is to do good. And how much good are we actually doing? And, my guess is anybody who's heard us talk before has heard me kind of challenge everyone to after you hear this talk, write a kind note to somebody that will be surprised to hear from you. Like just that. Make a phone call to somebody that hasn't heard from you. And we just spread that positive energy of loving, because, we have a mitzvah to love your neighbor as yourself. That seems to be an unreasonable request. How can I love my neighbor as myself? I don't know them so well. And, okay, we'll go out for a coffee and we'll talk and I'll see if we resonate and maybe I'll like them. But what does it mean to love my neighbor as myself? Can I really control feelings of love towards somebody? Some people I like, some people I don't like. What am I supposed to do? Well, Ahavta l'recha kamocha is not a feeling. Judaism can't and will not command a feeling. It's really an action. And the action is to treat people in a loving way, even if you don't feel like it. So I think that gets in the way when we talk about we're going to rebuild the base of Mikdash with senseless love. So it doesn't feel realistic. It's not possible. Like, how am I going to feel love for all these people? Well, that's a mistake. That Judaism does not command us to feel. It commands us to act. And so loving your neighbor as yourself is to treat them in a loving way, even if you don't like them. Even if you don't have good feelings towards them, offer good actions towards them. And that will very likely, delete those negative feelings. But even if they don't, that's what the mitzvah is, to do good. And it's senseless, meaning I have no reason to do good. If I'm kind to somebody because I owe them, well, that's not kindness. That's just simply returning a favor. That's kind of like business. That's reciprocating, which is good. It's not kindness. Kindness is when I do something for somebody that I don't need to do. I'm not reciprocating something back because they did something for me. I just do it. It's kind, it's good, and I just do it.
There's this saying, you are what you do repeatedly. And when you talk about what does it mean to be a good person, well, you're really explaining the more we do good actions, then that is who I become, a good person, because I am what I do repeatedly. And in a sense, we're talking about how can we see things or see people or see situations with a more positive eye. And I would have almost thought we might start more with how do we think about everything, other people, and work on our thought process. But you're really starting a different direction, which I think, but it comes back to it, that if I speak about other people in a good light and about, life and situations around me, speak about the positive that I see, not necessarily put an emphasis in my speech on the negative. If I act in a way that is good and caring and being there for other people, whether I feel it or not, then that ultimately really seeps in and it does become who I am. And I imagine it also starts to affect the way I think.
Right. And to start with the thinking, I really don't think works very well, because how do you say to a person, don't think negatively about your neighbor? As soon as you say don't think negative about your neighbor, he starts thinking about that. It's like the famous story, don't think about, white elephants. And the person says, well, I never think about white elephants. And sure enough, he starts thinking about white elephants. As soon as you tell a person not to think something, they start thinking about that. And so we're going to go in a completely different direction. We're going to try and control what really is a lot more in our control, which is what we say and what we do. If it influences our thinking, great. If it doesn't influence our thinking, doesn't matter. To love somebody freely is an action. And if you feel it, great. If you don't feel it, don't worry about it. And the feeling might come sooner or later. But in the meantime, loving your neighbor as yourself means it's actually within our capacity to love our neighbor as ourselves. And why is that? Really, because in a deep existential way, Judaism teaches, is we all in the deepest way share one soul. What divides us is our bodies, But the truth is, without our bodies, we would really be one soul. And so to love another person is really acting in a way that is consistent with a reality that we are one with everybody, whether we want to be or not, because in the deepest sense, we are part of what's called a unified spiritual field.
So in a sense, that really goes back to what we're saying, is that if I don't have a real sense of value and love for myself, that often is expressed outward in the way I treat and act towards other people. Because in the bigger sense of things, that person and I are connected. So if I am not so, can't see the value in myself, it's going to reflect in the way I see someone else, because there is that connection. But the more I can also see a sense of value within myself, then I will also, and I love myself, then it will be easier for me, because we are connected, to be able to see others that way, treat others that way as well.
It's the same thing towards ourselves. People have negative thoughts towards themselves, and to say, well, I got to stop thinking this way about me. It's very hard to stop thinking about anything. But at the very least, don't say bad things about yourself, not even to yourself, but obviously not to somebody else. It's really quite shocking what negative things people will say about themselves, things that they wouldn't want their worst enemy to say about them. They actually feel that they've got the right to say about themselves. The laws of Lashon Hara include us. We're not allowed to speak Lashon Hara about ourselves, which I'm not sure a lot of people even realize that. They think, no, they even think maybe it's humbling. It's a sign of humbleness that I can knock myself down in the face of others. I don't have the right to do that. Because when we don't feel good about ourselves, it's very hard to be in a healthy relationship with anybody else. So we do need to practice random acts of kindness towards ourselves and ask ourselves, what have I done recently kind to me? What kindness do I actually perform for myself?
It's really similar because you're saying that even if you don't feel loving towards someone else, but if you act that way, if you act and say, how would I act? You have to think, even practically, if I actually cared for this neighbor, what are the kinds of things I would do to show that I cared? And I don't care for them, but I want to be the kind of person that is caring even to someone who I have a hard time caring for, so I'm going to try to do those things. And we have to do that for ourselves too. Maybe I don't really care for myself the way I should. I don't love myself the way I should, and it's starting to reflect, it's reflecting outwards in all sorts of aspects and other relationships in my life. But if I did care about myself, what would be the kinds of things I do to take care of myself? What are the kinds of things I would never say to myself that maybe I am saying to myself now? So it's an interesting way of thinking about it, because it sort of like takes you outside yourself a little bit to say, really, as you're pointing out, the action is what I have control over. So what would it look like if I actually was caring for myself and caring for somebody else?
I read an article which really was very helpful. It spoke about that the key to self-esteem is self-discipline. Very often people think that they'll feel good about themselves if they kind of really treat themselves lavishly and be free with what they eat or how they dress and actually this article is pointing out that people have greater self-esteem when they have greater self-discipline and they're more careful and they eat healthier or they exercise, and they exercise and they dress, respectfully. And this is really the way to feel good about ourselves, by truly treating ourselves well. One of the things I say to my students, or 18-year-old students, is I'm wondering, are you doing things that you will want your children to be doing? Because if you're doing things which you are hoping you will tell your children not to do, then you don't love yourself. Why would you do that? Why would you do that? A lot of youth are getting drunk, so much alcohol. And I say, it's interesting how we refer to getting drunk as getting trashed or getting wasted. I said, at least it's an honest description of what you're actually doing to yourself, that you really do treat yourself as trash and you do treat yourself as waste, because why would you want to spend your time just getting drunk? Don't you have something better to do?
All these points that you're bringing out really bring us back to, we have to almost, take a step back and look at ourselves and say, how am I treating myself? As you're pointing out, am I treating myself with self-respect? Am I self-respect worthy? And if so, I want to start making choices and treating myself in a way that I can feel good about, that I can feel like I'm honoring myself and I have a sense of value for myself. I'll feel better about myself, and it will also reflect how I see the world around me. When we return, Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
In a time where feelings have become fact, where rational thought and common sense has disappeared, one man stands above it all.
I'm Howie Sobiker, your political hitman.
Political Hitman airs every Tuesday at 11:59 p.m. North American time, 7 a.m. Israeli time, only on Israel News Talk Radio.
Are you interested in transforming your life, drawing closer to the Creator, and uncovering the deeper meanings and hidden treasures in the Hebrew Bible?
Then join me, Rav Yitzhak Michelson,
and me, William Hall,
on the Science of Kabbalah, where we are seeking to narrow the gap between what we understand of our physical and spiritual worlds. So make sure to tune in every Tuesday at 5 p.m. Israel time, 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, here on Israel News Talk Radio.
Hello and welcome back to Soul Talk. Leora Mandel with Rabbi David Aaron. We're talking about how to develop a good eye And it's so important, not just for, it affects the way we see other people, the way we see life around us, but it's so important, as you're pointing out here, we have to really start within. How do we see ourselves? The place to start is with how we speak and how we act. But I wanted to ask you too, all of our lives have both a mix of positive and negative, good and bad. Obviously, some people, the proportions are higher at any given time. But what I've noticed is sometimes it doesn't always matter if a person has, let's say, more, not that you can put a number on it, but more good or more positive things and more obvious blessings and less challenges, or more challenges and what might seem to someone else less blessings. It's more a matter of what am I focusing on? And for some, it can be very difficult, and it can be so sidetracked by the challenges, the negative, the problems, so to speak. And that's, for some reason, it's like a magnet. That's what we keep on noticing. And the other things like we downplay. So when that is the situation, and I think, again, there's the way we speak, the way we act, that definitely has an effect here. How can we try to pull back or retrain ourselves to do the opposite, if anything, to try to highlight and emphasize and really pay attention to the positive and the blessing, and try to minimize, because I think the way we look at life, again, it will also affect the way we see other people and also how we view ourselves.
Well, there's a teaching in the Talmud says, Kol posel b'mumo posel. Whenever you criticize in somebody else, just know you have that very same trait. Not necessarily to the same extent, but if it's what they say in English, it takes one to know one. So, one of the ways to kind of know what's going on with somebody is you kind of ask them to picture someone that you don't like. Don't tell me their name, but just, but imagine someone you don't like. Now I want you to distill from this person that you don't like, 3 character traits about them that you don't like. You can be sure that those 3 traits that they're going to say are traits they themselves are suffering from. And again, it might not be to the same magnitude, but if this is what they focus on, if this is what gets them upset, then it's a sure sign that this is something they themselves have to work on. And so it goes back to, if we want to spread this baseless love, then we need to practice it towards ourselves. And because the more positive we'll feel about ourselves, the less needs we'll have to put other people down. And, misery spreads misery and joy spreads joy. And so it really does, start with us. How am I speaking about myself, to myself? How am I treating myself? What am I doing to myself? Am I doing anything that demonstrates genuine care? I read an article that pointed out that people who go to a veterinarian and are told to buy medicine for their dog are more inclined to actually do it than when they are told to buy medicine for themselves, which means they care about their dog more than themselves.
So, what's so interesting about that example? I have a different one, but I don't know, about half a year ago, we had all sorts of unexpected car repairs, and it wasn't something we had planned on. I don't think anyone does when these things come up. It wasn't like a planned repair. It just, things happened, and we had to shell out a nice amount of money. And of course we did it, and I took the time to take the car in, spent the money, just what you have to do. And then I had some issues with my back, and I kept sort of ignoring it and pushing it off because I didn't want to take the time. I didn't want to spend the money because a lot of the stuff is private, seeing people privately and spending more money on it. And all of a sudden it hit me one day, and I said, I do this for my car. Why aren't I willing to do this for myself? And I all of a sudden I made prioritize taking the time and spending the money. But it's very interesting. That's not even an animal, but it's like this thought of we don't care enough about ourselves sometimes, or we don't put ourselves and prioritize ourselves when we really should, when there's so many other things that are calling on us that are urgent we have to take care of. And I think it is so true that the more I recognize that I am important, I need to make sure I'm taken care of, that really does ultimately reflect out in so many other aspects of life.
Yes, that's exactly true. And that's going back to the practical of the, yes, but how? I'm sure there's nobody in the world that doesn't want to be in a world of love. so many songs and so many plays and so many movies about love. And yet, are we really in a loving world? A friend of mine just the other day told me that she went to her old high school, and it wasn't a Jewish high school, a public high school, and she couldn't recognize it. There was like fence around it and metal detectors at the door. And she was told how kids are joining gangs because that's the way they protect themselves. And there's just an incredible abundance of violence going on and shaming. And we go like, what? And if you asked anybody, like, what would you want this world to be? Who's not going to say a world of love? But I think people somehow think that love is easy. But the Beatles certainly said it was easy, but it's not easy. Love is work, and it's not a feeling. It is a feeling that comes without action. And if you have the feeling and you don't put it into action, then you really don't have the feeling. And so, yeah, it's like we are still plagued with, we love to hate more than we love to love. And it's really tragic what we're seeing today in the world with bullying, cyberbullying, and all that. Like, whoa, why? And really, any kid that's bullying another kid, you can be sure doesn't feel good about themselves, and they're looking for some sick way to feel good about themselves, feel powerful by exercising control over somebody weaker.
But the important thing, as you're pointing out too, is understanding how to genuinely feel good about ourselves. Because I think so much nowadays there's like counterfeit feeling good. It's like the more stuff I have, I can feel good about myself. Or just because everyone's telling me you're wonderful, that will make me feel good. But as you pointed out even earlier, that sometimes self-discipline is something that's not necessarily focused on nowadays, but that is the kind of thing that if I feel a sense of mastery, if I can have some sense of self-control, I was able to put effort into something, and that takes self-discipline to be able to be willing to put effort into something that I'm working hard on. Things like that is truly how I'll feel good. If I do good, I go out of anything, as you're pointing out, it's nice to feel good about wanting to help somebody out. But in certain ways, I think we even feel better about ourselves when we don't really want to do something nice for somebody else, but I want to be a nice person. And the way to be a nice person is to act nice. So even though I don't feel like it, I'm going to do it anyhow. And in a certain way, I think I actually feel better about myself when I have to almost go a little bit against myself and my feelings of not really wanting to, and I do it anyhow. So, meaning really also understanding how to truly have a sense of self-worth is so important to make sure we're not filling ourselves and our kids up with counterfeit self-worth.
Yeah, there's no better feeling than helping others have a better feeling. And that's the interesting thing about us. We they even talk about the chemistry of kindness, that dopamine, that when a person does an act of kindness, they get this little squirt of juice in their brain called dopamine. And even if they witness an act of kindness, they found that the brain squirts dopamine, meaning we have this inner system of reward that gives us kind of an uplift when we do good, and even if we just see people doing good. And but I don't know, when I'm on the plane, which I haven't been on a long time since COVID, but so many of the films are violent, and you see little children watching this, and we're thinking, how are we going to change a world where how many stories are about genuinely loving and caring about people? Yeah, that's where it's got to start.
So that is my question again. On the one hand, you're pointing out, and I think we've experienced this, that when we do good, we even get that bit of a dopamine high. On the other hand, you think that should encourage us to keep on doing good, and yet there is this pull. There is this pull to focus, whether it be an extreme thing like violence and bullying, as opposed to just focusing on the negative or the problems. There's this pull towards that, even though we actually feel better, do better, and even still can get that positive rush from doing the positive and the good.
Well, I have a theory that goes like this. I feel that we're in a world that has become really very comfortably numb. And we are looking for ways, sensations, to kind of like, almost like what they used to do for depression, shock treatment. We're actually subjecting ourselves to movies. I'm not, but, movies that are just outrageous in their sensationalism, because we're looking for something to kind of jar us, move us, like awaken us. And I think it actually has an opposite effect. The louder we turn up the music, the quicker we just adapt to that and turn it up even louder. And it becomes this like sick addiction. But, it's easy to hate. It takes work to love. And it doesn't feel fair. It's not equal. It's easier to destroy than to build. We can destroy so quickly something that took so long to build. And it's not like equal. And so we need to work harder at really being kind and putting it in very practical terms. Do a tiny task of kindness, and that'll go a long way. It's like small change. A guy says, "You got any small change?" The truth is that small change could really mean for us big change.
And this is the time period in particular that we really need to put in this work and work on this, and it will have long-ranging results. I want to thank you all for joining us. Soul Talk, Rabbi David Aaron and Leora Mandel.
Where can you get the inside news on Israel? At Israel News Talk Radio, we're dedicated to sharing Israel's inside story with the world by providing our listeners with news on Israeli politics, current affairs, and Israeli Jewish culture. The Israel News Talk Radio homepage also provides you, the listener, with useful information at your fingertips, with scrolling news headlines, weather, currency exchange, Shabbat candlelighting times, and so much more. Our radio programming is always accessible and on demand. We operate absolutely free of charge for everyone, everywhere. If you love what we do, partner with us now by becoming an Israel News Talk Radio supporter. With your support, you'll be inscribed on our Israel News Talk Radio Wall of Fame. There's nothing like us in the world. Be part of something great. Israel News Talk Radio. Straight talk from Israel.
Howdy, this is Rita from League City, Texas, now living in Israel. And though my heart may have belonged to Texas, it now belongs to Israel and all the fantastic show hosts at Israel News Talk Radio.
Hi, this is Michael Solomon from Kiryat Arba, Israel. And why do I love listening to Israel News Talk Radio? Because I love listening to the interesting interviews they do and their news reporting that most other media sources don't cover.
Hey, this is Nicoleko from Malmö, Sweden. It gets pretty cold here in Sweden, so I love cuddling up with a warm cup of tea while I listen to Israel News Talk Radio.
Hey everybody, this is Frank Morris from Tennessee. Me and my dog Buster really love listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.
News, opinion, and more. You're listening to Israel News Talk Radio.